The silk of the midnight blue gown felt like a cool lie against Jennifer Townsend's skin. It was a lie she had worn for 7 years, a shimmering fabrication of happiness stitched together with compromise and silence. Tonight, the lie felt heavier than usual, clinging to the subtle swell of her abdomen, a secret she and the fabric shared. 3 months. A new life was knitting itself together inside her, a tiny, defiant pulse in the vast, cold stillness of the Buckhead mansion she called home. Her husband, Marcos Davidson, stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette of immense power against the bruised twilight of the Atlanta sky. He wasn't looking at the view. His gaze was sharp, predatory, fixed on the phone in his hand. The screen cast an alien blue glow on his chiseled features, illuminating a faint, tight smile that never reached his eyes. It was a smile Jennifer had come to dread. It didn't signal joy. It signaled a victory she was not privy to. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the marble floors. He didn't turn around. He never did. The world revolved around Marcos Davidson. He expected others to orbit him accordingly. "Almost," Jennifer said, her voice softer than she intended. She reached for the diamond necklace on the velvet-lined tray. The stones were cold, inert, like the promises he'd made when he'd placed a much larger diamond on her finger. They were meant to be symbols of forever, but they felt more like collateral. She had sacrificed everything to become Mrs. Davidson, her modest career in art curation, her small circle of genuine friends, the easy laughter she once shared with her parents. She had traded it all for a life of curated perfection, of charity boards and silent lunches with women whose pedigrees were as flawless as their porcelain veneers. She had convinced herself it was a fair trade, that security for her future, and now her child's future, was worth the price of her own voice. But lately, the silence was becoming deafening. Her anxiety, a familiar ghost, wrapped its clammy hands around her throat. It wasn't just the gala, the annual Davidson Foundation fundraiser, where she would have to perform her role as the adoring, placid wife. It was the growing chasm between them, a silent, tectonic drift that had accelerated in recent months. It was the late nights he blamed on closing deals, the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his suits, the way he guarded his phone as if it contained state secrets. Tonight, the tension was a physical presence in the room. It smelled of his expensive cologne and the sterile cleanness of the oversized suite. It tasted like the metallic tang of fear in the back of her throat. "Hurry up, Jennifer. We can't be late to our own event." He finally pocketed his phone, the motion sharp and final, and turned. His eyes, the color of aged whiskey, swept over her, but his assessment was devoid of warmth. It was the look of a man appraising an asset. "The dress is fine, the necklace works. Let's go." He offered no compliment, no touch. He simply turned and walked towards the door, expecting her to follow. And she did. She always did. As she passed the antique silver mirror in the grand foyer, she caught her own reflection. A woman in a beautiful cage, her eyes holding a depth of observation no one, least of all Marcos, ever bothered to see. She was the quiet one, the agreeable one, the one he had chosen precisely because he believed she would never challenge him. He underestimated her. Everyone did. They mistook her quietness for weakness, her patience for submission. They didn't see the steel forging in the fire of her silent resentment. Downstairs, the air was thick with the scent of lilies, funereal and cloying. Marcos's personal assistant, a perpetually nervous young man named Alex, was waiting by the door, holding a briefcase. "Everything is set for the announcement, sir," Alex said, his eyes darting nervously between Marcos and Jennifer. "It had better be," Marcos clipped, taking the briefcase. "This is the biggest merger of my career. Tonight is about power, Alex. Nothing can go wrong." Jennifer's hand drifted unconsciously to her belly. An announcement. He hadn't mentioned an announcement to her. Another secret held in the cold blue light of his phone. She smoothed the silk over the barely there curve, a protective gesture. She was carrying his child, the heir to the Davidson empire he was so obsessed with building. And yet, she felt more like a ghost in his life than ever before. As they stepped out into the humid Georgia night, the click of her heels on the stone driveway sounded like a countdown. She felt a premonition, cold and sharp, that the lie she was wearing was about to unravel completely. The ballroom of the St. Regis Atlanta was a universe of manufactured starlight. 1,000 crystal teardrops wept light from a dozen chandeliers, scattering fractured rainbows across the faces of Atlanta's elite. The air hummed with the symphony of wealth, the delicate chime of champagne flutes, the rustle of couture silk, and the low, predatory murmur of conversations about mergers, acquisitions, and the fluctuating fortunes of men like her husband. The scent of money was pungent, a heady mix of expensive perfume, aged scotch, and ambition. Jennifer stood by Marcos's side, a perfect accessory, smiling until her cheeks ached. He worked the room with the practiced ease of a king holding court, his hand a proprietary weight on the small of her back. He introduced her not by her name, but by her title. My wife. She was a testament to his good taste, a beautiful, silent validation of his success. "Marcos, my boy!" Senator Whitlock boomed, clapping Marcos on the shoulder. "Heard you're about to close the NeuroCorp deal. You're a damn shark." "We're getting there, Senator," Marcos said, his smile sharp and confident. "Tonight's about giving back, but tomorrow we feast." The men laughed, a sound that grated on Jennifer's nerves. For them, it was a game. A grand, thrilling hunt. For her, it felt like being trapped in the predator's den. After an hour of suffocating pleasantries, Marcos guided her to their designated table at the forefront of the ballroom. It was laden with towering floral arrangements and an obscene number of wine glasses. "I need to speak with my people," he said, his tone dismissive. He was already scanning the room, his focus entirely elsewhere. "Stay here. Look pretty." He didn't wait for a reply. He was gone, swallowed by a sea of tuxedos and jewels, leaving her alone at the center of a glittering vortex. The abandonment was a familiar sting, but tonight it felt different. More pointed, more public. She took a slow sip of water, her hand trembling slightly. Her pregnancy had heightened her senses, and the room felt overwhelming, a cacophony of sights and sounds that set her teeth on edge. She began to watch. It was what she did best. She was an observer, a collector of small, overlooked details. She noticed Alex, the nervous assistant, hovering near the ballroom's edge, wringing his hands and repeatedly checking his watch. He looked pale, almost green, under the golden light. She saw Marcos in a tight huddle with his board members, his gestures sharp, his face a mask of cold fury. Something was wrong. The confident predator she'd seen earlier had vanished, replaced by a man on the verge of losing control. Then she saw her. Lauren Pierce, the new financial analyst, barely 25, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes that held a dangerous combination of intelligence and ambition. She was standing near the French doors leading to the terrace, pretending to study a piece of art on the wall. But her body was angled towards Marcos's huddle, her posture radiating a tense, anxious energy. Jennifer's intuition, a long-dormant instinct, screamed. It wasn't just a business deal gone awry, this was personal. The air crackled with a secret she was suddenly desperate to know. She pushed back her chair, her movements fluid and deliberate. No one noticed her leave the table. She was, as always, invisible. She slipped through the crowd, a phantom in midnight blue. As she neared the terrace doors, she could hear fragments of whispers from a nearby table. "Davidson looks like he's about to kill someone." I heard NeuroCorp pulled out, last minute. It was an inside leak, sabotage. Jennifer's heart hammered against her ribs. She pushed open one of the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool, damp air of the terrace. The city lights of Buckhead spread out below, a glittering, indifferent tapestry. And there, in a secluded alcove shrouded by potted magnolias, was Marcos. He wasn't alone. He had Lauren Pierce pinned against the stone balustrade, his hands gripping her arms. But it wasn't an attack. It was an embrace of frantic intimacy. Lauren's head was buried in his chest, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "You promised you'd handle it." Lauren's muffled voice was thick with panic. "You said they'd never find out about the offshore transfers. My name is on those documents, Marcos." "Shut up," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think I wanted this? Someone talked. The whole deal is collapsing because of your incompetence." "My incompetence? I did exactly what you told me to do." The world tilted on its axis. Offshore transfers. Her name on documents. It wasn't just an affair. It was something far more dangerous. The blood drained from Jennifer's face, leaving her skin feeling as cold and hard as the marble floor beneath her feet. She took a step forward, the scrape of her heel on the stone betraying her presence. Marcos's head snapped up. His eyes, when they met hers, were not those of a husband caught in a moment of infidelity. They were the eyes of a cornered animal, feral and terrifying. Lauren recoiled, her face a mess of tears and smudged mascara. "Jennifer," Marcos breathed, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He let go of Lauren and took a step towards his wife, attempting to reassemble his mask of control. "This isn't what it looks like." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. "Isn't it?" Jennifer's voice was unnervingly calm, a quiet hum beneath the city's roar. "It looks like you're comforting your financial analyst, the one whose name is on illegal documents, the one you've been whispering to on the phone for months." Marcos's face darkened. The mask crumbled completely. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You should have just stayed at the table like a good little wife." "The martyr wife?" Jennifer shot back, the words tasting like acid. "The one who smiles and hosts your parties and pretends not to see the lies? I'm tired of that role, Marcos." "You're nothing without me," he snarled, advancing on her. His rage was a palpable force, a heat wave that warped the air between them. "You live in my house. You wear my name. You spend my money. You are an accessory, Jennifer, and an accessory does not speak." A few curious guests, drawn by the raised voices, had drifted onto the terrace. The soft glow of phone screens began to appear in the periphery. Cameras were turning their way. Tears pricked at Jennifer's eyes, hot and sharp, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. She stood her ground, her quiet strength a stark contrast to his explosive fury. She lowered her voice to a whisper, a single, devastating truth she had been saving. "I'm carrying your child, Marcos." The words hung in the air, a fragile, impossible shield. For a heart-stopping second, something flickered in his eyes. Shock. Maybe even a trace of awe. But it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a new, more horrifying wave of rage. He saw her pregnancy not as a miracle, but as a trap, a final, unbreakable chain. "You manipulative bitch," he spat. And then his hand came up. The motion was a blur of violence. The slap was not a mere strike. It was an explosion. The crack echoed across the terrace, a sound so sharp and brutal it seemed to tear a hole in the night. Jennifer's head snapped to the side, the impact sending a blinding white-hot pain through her cheek and jaw. The world spun, a dizzying kaleidoscope of city lights and horrified faces. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, her other hand instinctively guarding her stomach. A collective gasp rose from the growing crowd. The flashes were no longer discreet. They were a blinding, relentless strobe, capturing every detail of the humiliation. Lauren Pierce stood frozen, her own drama forgotten, her face a mask of pure horror. Marcos stood over her, his chest heaving, his hand still raised slightly, a monument to his own monstrosity. He had slapped his pregnant wife in front of his mistress, in front of the world. But in the shadows, just beyond the main cluster of onlookers, one man was not merely gawking. He held his phone steady, his expression grim and focused. He wasn't just a guest. His posture was too alert, his gaze too analytical. He zoomed in past the slap, past Jennifer's shocked face, and focused on Marcos and Lauren, recording the raw, panicked conversation that had preceded the violence. This man, an island of cold purpose in a sea of shock, saw more than a domestic dispute. He saw a thread, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that this single, brutal act was the key to unraveling a much larger crime. He captured it all, not just the scandal, but the evidence. The drive to Maddie's was a blur. Jennifer couldn't remember leaving the gala, couldn't recall the face of the kind valet who had shielded her from the popping flashbulbs and ushered her into her car. Shock was a merciful anesthetic, numbing the sharp edges of pain and humiliation. She drove on autopilot, her hands gripping the wheel, her knuckles white. The only sound in the car was her own ragged breathing, punctuated by a single, dry sob that escaped her throat like a trapped bird. Maddie's house was a small, warmly lit craftsman bungalow in Virginia Highland, a world away from the cold marble mausoleum Jennifer called home. It smelled of beeswax and old books and chamomile tea. Maddie, her best friend since college, opened the door before Jennifer's finger even touched the bell. One look at Jennifer's face, the blooming purple bruise on her cheek, the vacant horror in her eyes, was all it took. "Oh, Jen." Maddie's voice was a whisper of pure compassion. She wrapped her arms around Jennifer, pulling her into the safety of her home and holding her as the first real, wrenching sobs began to tear through her body. There were no questions, no platitudes, just the solid, grounding presence of a friend who had seen behind the curtain of Jennifer's perfect life for years. Jennifer cried until she was empty, a hollowed-out vessel of grief. She cried for the woman she used to be, for the love she thought she had, and for the tiny, innocent life inside her, now tethered to this catastrophe. When the tears finally subsided, she sat on Maddie's worn floral sofa, clutching a mug of tea Maddie had pressed into her hands, the warmth a small anchor in the storm. Then her phone, which she'd left in her purse, began to buzz. And it didn't stop. It was a frantic, incessant vibration against the hardwood floor. Maddie retrieved it, her expression grim as she looked at the screen. "Don't look," Maddie advised, her voice gentle. But Jennifer had to know. She took the phone. The screen was a nightmare of notifications, hundreds of missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, texts from everyone she'd ever known, and the news alerts, one after another, like hammer blows. Forbes, Davidson heir in shocking gala assault. TMZ, millionaire slaps pregnant wife in front of mistress. Twitter, Buckhead betrayal is the #1 trending topic worldwide. Someone had posted the video. Of course they had. With trembling fingers, she clicked on a link. The shaky phone footage was horrifyingly clear. The terrace, the confrontation, her own voice, small and defiant, saying, "I'm carrying your child." And then the crack of the slap, the gasp of the crowd. It had been viewed millions of times. She was no longer Jennifer Townsend. She was a hashtag, a victim, a spectacle. She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. A wave of nausea washed over her, and she barely made it to the bathroom before she was sick. Kneeling on the cool tile floor, she clutched her belly, a fierce, primal wave of protectiveness surging through her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about her baby. When a man shows you who he is, believe him the first time. Her father's words, spoken to her years ago when she'd first been swept away by Marcos's charm and wealth, echoed in her mind. Her father, a quiet, steady man who built houses with his hands, had never trusted Marcos. He saw the rot beneath the polish. She hadn't listened. Marcos tried to call. His name flashed on the screen again and again. Then his mother, Margaret Davidson, a woman with a spine of ice and a tongue like a razor. Then his lawyers. She silenced the phone and pushed it away. She spent the night curled on Maddie's sofa, wrapped in an old quilt, staring into the darkness. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flash of his hand, felt the sting on her cheek. She didn't cry anymore. The grief was hardening into something else, something cold and resolute. The next morning, her parents called. Her mother's voice was strained with panic. "Jen, honey, we saw the news. We're on the first flight out of Harrisburg. We'll be there by noon." The thought of them, of their unconditional love, was the first thing that had felt real in 24 hours. When she met them at the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport arrivals gate, the dam broke again. Her father, a mountain of a man with gentle eyes, simply hugged her, his large, calloused hands patting her back as if she were still a little girl. Her mother, Eleanor, held her face, her own eyes swimming with tears as she gently brushed a finger over the bruise on Jennifer's cheek. "We've got you," her father murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "No one will ever hurt you again." That evening, sitting in Maddie's quiet kitchen, her mother told her a story Jennifer had never heard before. She spoke of her own first marriage, long before she'd met Jennifer's father, a marriage to a charming man whose temper flared behind closed doors. "He never hit me in public," Eleanor said, her gaze distant, fixed on a memory Jennifer couldn't see. "It was always where no one could see the bruises. I stayed for 2 years, making excuses, telling myself he would change. The hardest thing I ever did was leave. The bravest thing I ever did was choose myself over his promises." She looked at Jennifer, her eyes clear and strong. "You have a strength in you, Jennifer, a quiet strength. You got it from a long line of women who learned to survive. You will get through this. And you will not just survive, you will build something better on the other side." Hearing her mother's story, seeing the echo of her own pain in her mother's past, was like a key turning in a lock. It wasn't just her fight. This was a legacy. Her mother had chosen to leave. Now, it was Jennifer's turn. She clutched the warm mug of tea, the familiar scent a balm to her frayed nerves. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time, it was joined by a flicker of something new. A spark of defiance, a quiet, unyielding resolve. Marcos had started a war with a single slap. He had no idea she was preparing to fight back with an entire arsenal. 2 days after the gala, a plain manila envelope appeared on Maddie's doorstep, addressed to Jennifer Townsend. There was no return address. Inside was a single unbranded burner phone and a folded note. "Ms. Townsend, my name is Robert Chen. The incident at the gala was unfortunate, but it may have created an opportunity. I believe your husband is involved in significant financial crimes. The video of the assault is public, but I have a recording of the conversation that preceded it. I work for a federal agency that has been investigating Davidson Capital for months, but we've been missing a key piece, an inside source. If you are willing to help, we can offer you protection and ensure justice is served, not just for what he did to you, but for all of it. Await my call on this device at 3 p.m. tomorrow." Jennifer's blood ran cold. A federal agent, Robert Chen. He was the man from the shadows, the one whose gaze was analytical, not merely shocked. He had seen everything. The words on the page were terrifying, and simultaneously, a lifeline. For 2 days, she had been a victim, her story defined by a viral video of her humiliation. This note offered her a different role, the catalyst for his downfall. Fear was a cold, coiling serpent in her gut. Marcos was powerful, vindictive, and dangerous. Cooperating with the feds was a declaration of war against a man who had armies of lawyers and limitless resources. But then she felt a faint, fluttering movement in her womb, a tiny, insistent reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just about her safety. It was about her child's. She would not raise a son or daughter in the shadow of a man like Marcos Davidson, a world built on lies and violence. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Choose yourself. Build something better. When the burner phone rang at precisely 3 p.m. the next day, her hand was steady as she answered. "Ms. Townsend," a calm, professional voice said. It was Robert Chen. "Have you considered my proposal?" "What do you need?" Jennifer asked, her own voice surprising her with its firmness. "Davidson has a home office. We have reason to believe he keeps a private set of books, ledgers, and data on encrypted drives, separate from what's at his corporate headquarters. He's arrogant. He likes to keep his secrets close. We need that data. Anything related to shell corporations, offshore accounts, specifically accounts in the Cayman Islands or Switzerland, or transactions related to the Davidson Family Foundation, the charity, the one she had helped promote, whose board she sat on. The thought that it too was a sham made her feel sick. "I think I know the combination to his private safe," she said, her mind racing. He'd told it to her once, laughing, drunk on champagne after closing a deal. "My first dog's name and the year I made my first $1,000,000. He was so sure of her passivity, he hadn't bothered to change it. "Getting it will be dangerous," Chen warned. "He's likely had the mansion's security upgraded. He'll be paranoid." "He thinks I'm a mess," Jennifer countered. "He thinks I'm hiding, crying. He'll expect me to come for my clothes, maybe some jewelry. He won't expect me to come for his secrets." A plan began to form. A desperate, high-stakes heist. Her father, with his quiet strength and unshakable resolve, was her first and only choice for an accomplice. When she told him, he didn't hesitate. "I'll be right beside you," he said, his hand covering hers. "We'll get you what you need." 2 days later, under the cloak of a moonless night, they put the plan into action. Jennifer, dressed in black, her face pale but determined, sat in her father's truck a block away from the mansion. He had done a drive-by earlier. 2 private security cars were parked out front, but a blind spot existed along the back wall, near the gardens she had so lovingly tended. Her father, a man who had spent 40 years in construction, disabled the alarm system's motion sensors on the back patio with an expertise that amazed her. They slipped inside through the kitchen door she'd intentionally left unlocked on a previous, supervised visit to collect some personal items. The house was dark and silent, a sleeping beast. The air was stale, different from how she remembered it. It no longer felt like her home. It felt like enemy territory. Every creak of the floorboard sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. They moved silently up the grand staircase to Marcus's office. The room smelled of his cigars and his ego. Oversized mahogany desk, leather-bound books he'd never read, a portrait of his grim-faced grandfather glowering from the wall. The safe was hidden behind a false panel of an antique bookcase. "Rocco 1998, Jennifer whispered, her fingers fumbling with the keypad. She held her breath. A soft click echoed in the silence. The heavy door swung open. Inside was a treasure trove of deceit. Black-bound ledgers, a stack of passports under different names, and a row of encrypted USB drives labeled with cryptic codes. Geneva, Cayman, Foundation. Her father stood guard at the door while she quickly photographed the ledger pages with the burner phone and swept the USB drives into a bag. They were in and out in less than 10 minutes. The next day, Jennifer met with Catherine Walsh, a formidable divorce attorney Maddie had recommended. Catherine was everything Marcus's lawyers were not: sharp, empathetic, and fiercely protective. She listened to Jennifer's story, her eyes taking in the bruise that was now a sickly yellow-green. "The slap is our leverage for the divorce," Catherine stated, her tone all business. "But what you have in this bag, this is our leverage for your freedom." She took the bag of evidence. "Let me handle the SEC handover. We'll build a fortress around you so high that Marcos Davidson will never be able to touch you or your child again." Leaving Catherine's office, Jennifer felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer just running. She was fighting. A week later, another call came. It was Catherine. "We have an interesting development. Lauren Pierce has reached out. She's terrified. Marcos has threatened her, and she knows she's implicated. She's willing to testify against him in exchange for immunity." Jennifer's first instinct was a flash of anger. This was the woman her husband had chosen over her. But it was quickly replaced by a weary empathy. She remembered Lauren's panicked face on the terrace, her cry of, "My name is on those documents." Lauren wasn't a mastermind. She was a pawn, another young woman chewed up and spat out by Marcos's ambition. She was a victim, too. "What does she want?" Jennifer asked. "To save herself," Catherine said simply, "and to burn him to the ground. She can corroborate everything on those drives and fill in the gaps. She's our star witness." Jennifer thought for a long moment. Holding on to hatred for Lauren would only poison herself. Forgiveness felt impossible, but understanding was within reach. "Tell her yes," Jennifer said, a quiet resolve in her voice. "Tell her we'll help her. We're all on the same side now." She was building her own army, an unlikely alliance of women Marcos had wronged. And they were coming for his kingdom. Marcos Davidson was not a man accustomed to losing control. In his world, problems were solved with money, threats, or a combination of both. His pregnant wife, the quiet, pliable woman he had so carefully selected, was not supposed to be a problem. She was supposed to retreat, to crumble, to eventually be bought off into a quiet, comfortable exile. Instead, she had vanished. And in her silence, a storm was gathering. Flanked by a phalanx of stone-faced lawyers, Marcos and his mother, Margaret, called a press conference at the Davidson Capitol headquarters. The room was a feeding frenzy of reporters and camera crews, the air electric with scandal. Margaret, a matriarch carved from granite, took the podium first. She wore pearls and a look of pained maternal concern that was as false as a $3 bill. "My son is a good man," she began, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity. What happened at the gala was a moment of profound stress, a reaction to immense business pressure and to a deeply unfortunate personal situation. Marcos stepped forward, his face a carefully constructed mask of remorse. His cheek was clean-shaven, his suit impeccable. He looked every bit the wronged tycoon. "My wife, Jennifer," he said, his voice heavy with feigned sorrow, "has been struggling. We have been trying to navigate this privately, but her emotional state has become volatile. The pressures of her pregnancy have unfortunately exacerbated her instability. I deeply regret my reaction, but I was provoked during a moment of extreme emotional distress. For both of us." The narrative was clear, vicious, and classic gaslighting. She was the hysterical, hormonal pregnant woman. He was the beleaguered husband who had momentarily snapped under her irrationality. It was a story designed to prey on old prejudices, a desperate attempt to repaint him as the victim. Across town, in Maddie's quiet living room, Jennifer watched the press conference on a laptop, a cup of peppermint tea cradled in her hands. Her father sat beside her, his jaw tight with rage. Maddie paced behind the sofa, muttering curses under her breath. But Jennifer remained perfectly, unnervingly calm. She watched them spin their web of lies, her expression serene. When Marcos finished his speech, she simply closed the laptop. "It's time," she said quietly to her lawyer, Catherine, who was on the phone. "The package has been delivered to Agent Chen's office," Catherine confirmed. "Everything. The USB drives, the photos of the ledgers, and Lauren Pierce's sworn affidavit corroborating the timeline and the purpose of the shell corporations." While Marcos was fighting a battle in the court of public opinion, Jennifer had chosen a different battlefield, the United States District Court. She wasn't trading accusations. She was delivering irrefutable proof. The effect was not immediate, but it was seismic. Inside the sterile offices of the SEC, Robert Chen and his team of forensic accountants went to work. The encrypted drives, accessed with keys provided by a terrified but cooperative Lauren, were a Rosetta Stone of financial treason. The scenes unfolded like a montage of destruction. Analysts traced the money, their screens lighting up with a complex web of transactions. The Davidson Family Foundation, which sponsored hospitals and inner-city youth programs, was revealed to be a colossal money laundering machine. Millions in charitable donations were funneled through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, companies named after classical virtues like Veritas and Fidelis, before being deposited into private Swiss bank accounts controlled by Marcos and his mother. The Neurocorp deal had collapsed not because of a simple leak, but because Marcos had been using inside information to short the stock through one of these offshore entities, a crime that would add years to a potential sentence. Lauren's testimony was the narrative that connected the dots, explaining how she had been instructed to create the fraudulent paperwork, her youthful ambition exploited and twisted. She detailed secret meetings, verbal instructions, and the culture of fear and intimidation Marcos used to ensure compliance. The fortress Marcos had built around himself began to crumble, brick by brick. His board members, seeing the writing on the wall, began to distance themselves. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The shark who feasted on others was now bleeding in the water, and the other sharks were beginning to circle. His desperation became palpable. His calls to Jennifer's old phone, which now sat in a drawer in Catherine's office, became more frequent, more frantic. The tone shifted from indignant rage to pleading, then to threats. "Jennifer, pick up the phone. We can fix this. I'll give you anything you want. You are destroying this family, our child's legacy. Is this what you want? If you don't stop this, I swear to God, I will make sure you get nothing. I will ruin you." Jennifer never listened to the messages. Catherine's paralegal transcribed them, each one another piece of evidence of his harassment and instability, a stark contradiction to the calm, beleaguered man he had portrayed at his press conference. Jennifer simply continued her new routine: morning walks with her father, prenatal yoga classes, and quiet afternoons spent sketching designs for a nursery. She was building a new world while the old one burned to the ground. She ignored the noise, focusing only on the quiet truth she had set in motion. The loudest roar of the Davidson Empire was no match for the silent, undeniable facts she had delivered in a simple canvas bag. The collapse was not a slow decay. It was an implosion. Armed with Jennifer's evidence and Lauren's testimony, federal agents raided the Davidson Capitol headquarters and the Buckhead mansion simultaneously. The image that led the evening news wasn't of a triumphant Marcos, but of him and his mother, Margaret, being led away in handcuffs, their faces stark with disbelief and impotent fury. The empire built on hubris and fraud had been dismantled by a quiet woman they had fatally underestimated. The indictments were extensive: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, securities fraud, and conspiracy. The Buckhead betrayal scandal was eclipsed by the far larger story of the Davidson Foundation's massive charity fraud. Marcos Davidson went from being a villainous husband to one of the most reviled white-collar criminals in recent memory. Jennifer watched none of it. She was busy moving. Not back to a gilded cage, but into a modest, sun-drenched two-bedroom apartment in Midtown. The building had excellent security, paid for by a preliminary divorce settlement Catherine had swiftly and brutally negotiated. The apartment wasn't grand. It was something better. It was hers. It smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The living room had a large window that looked out over the green canopy of Piedmont Park, a view that felt more honest and alive than the sprawling, manicured lawns of her old life. Her parents stayed for 2 months, helping her settle. Her father, a man of few words, showed his love by assembling furniture, installing bookshelves, and triple-checking the locks on the doors. Her mother filled the kitchen with the smell of home-baked bread and the pantry with herbal tea. They were quiet, healing days. They would sit together in the evenings, not always talking, just sharing the comfortable silence. A family reknitting itself together. Jennifer found a job, not on a charity board, but as a project coordinator at a small, family-run construction firm owned by a friend of her father's. The work was tangible, real. She dealt with blueprints and budgets with the satisfying reality of creating something solid and useful from the ground up. She wore sensible shoes and carried a thermos of tea. For the first time in years, she felt proud of how she spent her days. Her life simplified into a peaceful rhythm. Mornings at work, afternoons spent decorating the nursery in shades of soft yellow and gray, evenings with a book or a phone call with Maddie. She was slowly, carefully, building a sanctuary for herself and her child. The fear hadn't vanished completely. It was a faint scar, a reminder of the fire she had walked through. But it no longer held power over her. It had been replaced by a deep, abiding sense of peace. 6 months after the raid, in the quiet dawn of a crisp autumn morning, Jennifer gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Dawn. It was a promise, a declaration. The light that always follows the darkest night. Holding her daughter for the first time, feeling that tiny, warm weight against her chest, Jennifer felt a love so fierce and absolute, it eclipsed everything else. This was her legacy. Not an empire of lies, but a life of truth and a future filled with light. 1 year later, the room was filled with quiet chatter and the comforting aroma of coffee. Women of all ages and backgrounds sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, some speaking softly, others just listening. At the front of the room, standing not on a stage but on the same level as everyone else, was Jennifer. She was different now. The haunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by a warm, confident light. She wore a simple dress, and her only jewelry was a small silver locket containing a picture of Dawn. This was the first official meeting of the Quiet Strength Project, a non-profit organization Jennifer had founded using the remainder of her divorce settlement. Its mission was simple: to provide legal, financial, and emotional support for women leaving abusive and controlling relationships. My mother once told me that the bravest thing she ever did was choose herself, Jennifer said, her voice clear and steady. For a long time, I didn't understand what that meant. I thought strength was about enduring, about being unbreakable. But it's not. Real strength, quiet strength, is about knowing you are worthy of peace. It's about taking that first, terrifying step toward claiming it for yourself. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the women who had come seeking help. A young mother with a bruised wrist, an older woman who had lost her financial independence, a college student trying to escape a controlling partner. She saw her own story reflected in their faces. After the meeting, she walked home through the park, pushing Dawn's stroller. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the path, and the air was filled with the laughter of children. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Catherine. Marcos and Margaret were sentenced today. 25 years. They got what they deserved. Jennifer read the message, took a deep breath of the clean, cool air, and slipped the phone back into her pocket without replying. It was news from a different lifetime, a story about someone else. Her life was here now, in the weight of her daughter's hand reaching for hers, in the purpose of her work, in the quiet joy of a simple walk in the park. She had faced the darkness and had not just survived. She had brought forth the dawn. As she continued on her way, a final thought settled in her mind, a truth she now knew in her very bones. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is writing the loudest truth.